here in September.
I need a nap.
Yeah, I agree. Welcome back to the Project Gen X podcast. I am one of your hosts, Alan Smith, along with...
Oh, you already hit the button. Huh?
Yeah, of course I did.
I'm the other guy, Big Dave.
And yeah, like I said, right there at the top, it is hard to believe that we are in September. I know. I mean, I love it. Look, I'm not the one that came up with this. Matt from Dinosaur Dracula a couple of years ago said that September 1st is officially the start of the Halloween season, and I tend to agree.
No, he's done wrong with that.
And I have seen all the Halloween stuff popping up everywhere, including Halloween Express opened.
I haven't had money, so I haven't even gone to go look.
I just, I run past some stuff. Most everybody has everything out now, or they have a good chunk of their stuff out. We still haven't got. You said Spirit is open on the other side of town.
Yeah, been open for like 3 weeks.
Wow, they opened it in August.
Yes,
really. I like that. I haven't had a chance.
No,
to go over there.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
But their sign went up 1st of August, and I saw people going in and out of the store 3 weeks ago.
Where it has been over here for the last 5-6 years, there's no movement. So I don't know if they're, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before last that, like, it was late before they opened. Like, it was like the last week of September or something like that. So
aren't Spirit stores usually like factory stores, though? They're not like franchises.
Yeah, I know. That's what I thought anyway. So I
could be wrong on that.
I don't know. That's we may have to contact Ariel and see if she knows anything since she worked for him for so long. But
she's worked for both of them.
Yeah, so I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, we are in September, and 30 years ago, on September the 10th, 1993. I know.
Feels like a Friday.
It was a Friday. A little show that you might have heard of called the X-Files. I know. Debuted. And the X-Files, man, that was a phenomenon. I mean, it was a phenomenon.
I mean, it was something that everybody was talking about.
Right.
But honestly, I didn't really catch it until, I started seeing episodes in syndication.
Yeah.
Because it was on a Friday.
Right.
And I was usually out doing stuff.
I agree.
Friday nights.
I was in college. I happened to be at home. I remember seeing the trailer, like the promo for it. I'm like, oh, this looks pretty interesting. And it came on at 7 o'clock Central Time. It came on at 7 o'clock on Friday nights.
Yeah.
And I was like, I happened to be at home that Friday night. I guess it was before I went out or something. And I was like, oh, hey. And so I sat down and watched that first episode. It was like, okay, I like this. This is right up my alley of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't really, it was, again, because it was Friday night, I did not watch it. I would catch it sporadically here and there, but towards the end of the first season was when I really got hooked on it.
Yeah.
Where I was like, oh, no, this show is awesome, And I don't even remember the specific, episode. It was just kind of one of those, I just really got into it, And then I was with it until the 6th season premiered. And
6th season, was that the one where Mulder basically disappeared?
That was a couple seasons later, but that was in the...
I know Duchovny wasn't showing up as much. It kind of focuses more on Scully.
Right, and then they brought in a couple other people. They brought in...
guy from Terminator 2.
Yeah, Patrick, Robert Patrick.
Yeah.
It was him, and it was Annabeth Gish came on the show to kind of replace Mulder. And it was funny because they kind of, at that point, and we'll get into more of it, but at that point, they kind of flipped roles where Scully was no longer the skeptic. She was the one that was the believer, and then...
Well, after Mulder got kidnapped.
Yeah, I know. There is so much... We are not going to do a comprehensive look back at this because it would really and truly take me or us going back and having to watch the entire 11 seasons of this thing. And
because I don't think I've seen any of it in sequence.
Yeah, and one of our first episodes that we did, of course, this day, back when we first...
No, I'm not sure I do, because you caught me while I was on pain medication from surgery.
Back when we first started this show, we took 2 episodes that were non-conspiracy episodes, basically.
Monster of the Week.
They were Monster of the Week type stuff. We did Humbug and we did Home.
Yeah.
We did 3 of them. We did Humbug, we did Home, and we did Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
Yes.
And they're all excellent episodes that Jose Chung's From Outer Space deals with a little bit of the overarching story because it is about alien abductions.
Yeah.
But the other 2 are just kind of Monster of the Week of like, oh, this is just some weird stuff that happened. You know?
And that was the thing about the X-Files. You had the interweaving storyline that kind of goes throughout the entire seasons, which is dealing with Mulder and his sister's kidnapping and, exactly what part did his father take in, the X-Files and all of that because he was having to deal with his father and all that crap.
Right. And
then you got Monster of the Week.
And then there are some great Monster of the Week.
Yeah.
Like there are some great Monster of the Week episodes that, one of my favorite from the first season is called Ice. And it is where they're going to, Mulder winds up going to Alaska with this research crew, and
it wasn't Sheldon Cooper and the boys.
No, it wasn't.
That would have.
But it was. It's kind of like it's a little bit of The Thing, where there's something in the ice that's causing people to go crazy, type stuff,
Yeah.
And really good episode, like really good. There was another one in that first season. I think it was the first season where, and you'll notice that like a lot of the episodes, or a good portion of the episodes, wind up taking place in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, it's because they were in Vancouver filming all this. So it was like, oh yeah, we're already here, so we may as well make it. Since it looks like it, we'll go ahead and do it. But there was one because like this, we watched the pilot episode, which takes place in Oregon. Yeah, and I'm
honestly surprised they didn't do something with a Wendigo or something like that at one point.
They probably did at some point. Now we'll get into some of the outlying stuff because this thing wasn't just like I said, it was a phenomenon. Yeah, it wasn't just a TV show. There were video games, there were books, there were comic books,
there were movies,
there were. I mean, it was one of those things where it was like there were spinoffs,
there were techno songs.
Yeah, there was all kinds of stuff. Yeah, I mean, it was everywhere, and it's before we get into
it's still popping up in pop culture today.
It does.
Because anytime you deal with somebody, you're watching a TV or show or something, they start leaning into some kind of conspiracy theory or something. They're like, all right, Mulder.
Yeah, there is that. Well, all right, fine. Before we get into the show itself, let's talk about some of this. Like this, okay. There was an episode of The Simpsons where Dana Duchovny and Gillian Anderson came on, and they basically played characters. There are reference the Bare Naked Lady song. The 1 week talks about the X-Files.
Smoking Man.
Yeah, watching X-Files with the lights on. Or with and that kind of stuff. It's like all kinds of references here and there. Spoofs. Quite honestly, the whole when. In the mid-'90s, when Fox ran that Alien Autopsy hour special, if the X-Files hadn't been big, that would have never made it on television. I mean, as a matter of fact, the X-Files spoofed it in Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
Yes, they did.
And, it's one of those things. And then, like I said, it branched out, like Millennium, which we did an episode on a couple of years ago, the Lance Henriksen show was set in the same universe.
In fact, they had a crossover episode.
There was a crossover episode. It wasn't great, but it was there. But Jose Chung wound up on both shows.
You actually have a crossover with Law and Order.
We watched this one. Yeah. This is a part of the Munchverse.
Yes,
we watched the episode where Detective Munch winds up on here. It was really just, it was one of those shows that it was everywhere, and that's the whole, you're talking about. It started on Friday night. Now that Friday night is called the Friday night death slot. I mean, because it's like Fox has been trying for 3 decades now to launch something from that again. They tried it. Millennium didn't fly in that spot,
which I don't get because that was a good show.
It was a really good show. Well, here was the thing.
I'm gonna need to borrow your copy of
that's fine.
Millennium again.
It's funny because they actually Yeah, because Millennium took the X-Files moved from Friday night to Sunday night, and Millennium took the X-Files spot.
Yeah.
On Friday night, but there was also a show that Chris Carter did called Harsh Realm that was on. It was only like a season, I think. Might have even been only like 13 episodes or something.
Yeah,
that was set in the same universe. And so it's one of those things that they really tried. And then there was the Lone Gunmen.
Yeah, I was about to say, don't forget the Lone Gunmen spinoff.
And that one, you know the legacy of the Lone Gunmen spinoff, don't you? Okay, so that show premiered after the Super Bowl in 2001.
Yeah.
One of the early episodes of it was they were trying to stop a terrorist attack that involved flying airplanes into buildings.
Oh.
Yeah, and then you fast forward a few months.
Right.
And that actually happened. And and it was like...
Yeah, that would have been...
Yeah. And...
that's probably what got it shut down.
No, it was shut. It wasn't doing well in the ratings. The X-Files was on life support at that point. I mean, they only lasted one more year. And but that was they're trying to spin these guys off, which the Lone Gunmen were, and we're going to talk about them.
It's a good group.
Bit. Yeah, I loved
quirky.
Them. Yeah, I loved them just because they were they were like those side characters. It's like, oh, this is going to be a good episode. They're on here, just kind of like
It was like when the Ghost Facers would show up on Supernatural.
I have no idea of that.
Except
you said words, and
they weren't as likable as the Lone Gunmen.
You
just never could get into Supernatural.
And that's the other thing. Shows like Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer or I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that were kind of in that same what was the one
you're waving hands and snapping at me
that J.J. Abrams that came on Fox that was on like in the early 2000s had what's his name? Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek was in it. What was the name of that? What was the name of that show?
I know what you're talking about.
And
I watched it.
I watched the first season of it, and I lost it because there was other stuff. Like it moved.
His father's name was Walter.
Yeah, and it was very X-Files. Very reminiscent of the X-Files. I know. I can't believe I remember the name of it on the top of my head. But yeah, shows like that, and then of course there were after the X-Files became popular, you had shows like Profiler or Dark Skies, or there were Roswell, or any number of like these shows that were kind of like these. They were, they had something to do with law enforcement, but they usually had some kind of strange element to them as well,
Yeah.
What is the name of that show?
I don't know. It's bothering me. I couldn't find it.
And I am going to look at
Renee would be screaming at me right now.
That just... I'm
half tempted to call her.
I got it right here. Fringe.
Yes.
Fringe. That's what it was. Yeah. Fringe was very X-Files. Like, very X-Files.
Yeah.
And... but yeah, it was one of those shows that shone really brightly and made like a real mark.
Yeah, because it was
on the landscape, and then it was just gone.
It was from 93 to
2002.
Yeah,
it was when it went off the air initially.
Originally,
and
you got a couple movies.
Well, the first movie, I Want to Believe, came out in between season 5 and 6. Okay, and they really made me and a lot of other people mad with that one, because season 5 ended on a big cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they immediately started to impress on the movie. Like, this is going to be, this is what you want to know, everything. And then it wound up not being about that at all.
Yeah, because probably the studio got involved.
And now it was a good X-Files like arc. Like, if it had been a couple 2 or 3 episodes, it probably would have been okay. But it was...
Yeah, they made you pay money for it.
Right. And it's like, it was all right, fine. And then... no, excuse me. The first one was called Fight the Future. I take that back. That was the first. I Want to Believe came out of nowhere in 2009. Like, it was like, oh, yeah, by the way, we got an X-Files movie coming out. And it, again, I like that movie.
What was the one with the bugs?
with the bees. That was that was Fight the Future.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in 98. And then, like I said, in 2009, I Want to Believe came out, and it was post X-Files, you know, it kind of stuff. Mulder's not working for the FBI any longer, you know, and all this stuff. And then he gets called back in on a case.
Yeah.
And again, it was a good 2-part episode, but it wasn't it wasn't.
Here's $7.25.
Yeah, but you know what? I enjoyed it because I was like, no, I'm happy to see these characters again because at that point it had been a while. You know, it'd been 7 years. You know, and it was like, no, I'm really good. And then there was the revival that happened a few years after. Was that what, in 2011, 2012?
Yeah, where you got 2 seasons.
2 seasons of about 6 or 8 episodes.
I was kind of excited about. I was like, okay, I'll jump on the train this time and actually watch. And I watched till about halfway through the first season. Oh, yeah. And I was like...
I liked the first season 10, okay?
Yeah.
I never finished season 11. Like, I think I watched the first episode or 2, and then I just never finished it after that. And from what I'm told, it ended on a cliffhanger again that was kind of like really irritating. And of course, Gillian Anderson afterwards was like, I'm not coming back for this anymore. You know, she was like, I'm done with this. You know, it was fun coming back and doing this, but I'm done, you know. So I don't know. That was when they revived the X-Files. It was one of those situations where everything was there, but it wasn't quite right. And when I say that as it's not quite right, I think it's just because...
Well, at that point, Chris Carter had moved on to other projects and probably didn't have the passion for it.
No,
he did.
I don't think it was that. I think it was more... And I remember reading an article, somebody saying the same thing about, you know, does the X-Files have a place in modern society? Because we live in a society where we know conspiracies have happened, you know, whereas back 30 years ago was when those things, when they were still, a lot of them were just conspiracies. It's like, oh no, those are conspiracy theories, you know, blah, 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 blah. And now since then, it's like, no, we've seen this stuff play out in front of us.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, no, some of this stuff that they talked about happened, you know, and it's just kind of like, you know, that's watching the X-Files is the first time that I'd ever heard about Project Paperclip.
Really?
Yeah. You know, as where I'd learned about the Roswell crash. You know, mostly going into that, my realm of conspiracy theories were usually, you know, JFK, or every once in a while you'd hear somebody talk about the Illuminati or the Trilateral Commission or some, you know, some secret organization.
So Paperclip, Blue Light,
all that Blue Book, you know, all that stuff was like, that's where I as a teenager learned about a lot of that stuff. You know, it was the first time I kind of got brought on to like, oh, what is this? And then I had to go and like look into it. I was like, oh wow, this really happened. So
and then you start finding out stuff like the Tuskegee experiment.
Yeah. But so it was one of those things where it was like, in a lot of ways, the X-Files was kind of that whole like, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on that, you know, and this is like pre-internet. Like, they were, like, right on the very cusp of the internet becoming a thing, you know, like, in a normal thing, you know?
Well, AOL,
you know. So, and that was another thing. Like, the first time I ever got on AOL at Vol State, like, I was taking a class, you know, this is like 94 or 95 or somewhere around in there. And they were like, oh, yeah, blah, 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 you know, you go on, blah, blah, blah. The first thing I did is go look up X-Files stuff. You know, because I was like, no, this is, you know.
Yeah, ghost stories, Bigfoot.
Yeah, whatever. But specifically X-Files. Yeah. Like, I was looking for stuff about the X-Files, about the show, you know. And so it was right there at the very begining of all of that. And
AOL chat rooms were in education.
Keyword X-Files, you know, whatever. You know. But even just going to, like, websites and stuff that were, like, fan pages and this and that. And then, of course, you get into the conspiracy stuff and blah, 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 you know, and all the paranormal.
And then that rabbit hole turns into a sinkhole.
Yeah. Luckily, we did not have it at home or anything. I only got on it a little bit at that point.
No, we had it at the house. We had it at the house. I'm not even going to lie.
Once we finally had AOL, you know, I was more into just going and, like, just talking to people in the chat rooms and stuff than I was going in deep dives and all that. Although... mean, we might want to talk about the early days of the internet at some point, because it's stuff like rotten.com and all that kind of junk where it was like, wow. And talk about, I'm sure that's probably still around, but that was but you went to Rotten, didn't you?
If I did, I don't remember.
Yeah, dude, that's where like you could go and see the worst of the worst stuff at the time, and it was just like, dude, man.
I was more into the tinfoil hat stuff.
Yeah. But it was that kind of like, the X-Files just kind of, you would hear people say, I want to believe, or, that was the whole.
Everybody had that stupid poster.
I had that
hanging
poster,
up in their bedroom.
I love that poster. I love the new one, the new meme going around that shows that poster and it says, I want to believe. Then the government told me they were real.
Blue book.
So, but yeah, it's just kind of, it's such an interesting, it was such an interesting phenomenon. I guess it was kind of one of those things that of its time, it was right place, right time. People were ready for it, and it was, man, it was pulling in huge numbers on a Friday night.
And then on Sunday.
And then on Sunday for the rest of the time that it was going, it was just huge numbers. And I fell off of it in season 6 because most people who watched it will agree that season 5 was the best season that they did. And it really did. It was going, it was going along. It's like all this stuff, like it's leading up to something. It's leading up to something. It's leading up to something. And then it ended, and it's like, oh my goodness. And then there's this long wait because they were one of those first shows that was doing the whole, we're not coming back till November. So they would end in May.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with the fact that, at that time, Fox had gotten the Major League Baseball contract, so they were showing the World Series.
Yeah, and holding their shows.
And they were holding the shows till after the World Series were over. And so the X-Files was one of those first shows that got pushed to November.
Which was a huge missed opportunity on their part because they missed how many different opportunities for Halloween episodes?
I know. But not only just that, but also the fact of, okay, well, it ended in May now rather than just waiting until late August, early September. You got to wait 2 more months, and it's that kind of was where I kind of fell off with it because it was had to wait a long time, and then when it finally came back, plus the movie hadn't been what they said that it was going to be, and then by the time it came back, it didn't pick up exactly where I was hoping that it would, and then it quickly shuffled past all that stuff and got into the Monster of the Week stuff, and I'm like, wait a second, and I would pop in here and there, I would pop in and watch kind of stuff. And I mean, at that point I was working a full-time, I was post-college, I was working, a full-time job, and was
part of what made it hard for me to watch because I tend to be one of those guys that watches for the storyline with an occasional Monster of the Week type thing is cool with me. I mean, Supernatural would do that, or they would have the funny episode and all that. But I'm kind of there for the storyline and the continuing, and they started doing more Monster of the Week than storyline episodes.
That was something you didn't see a whole lot back then, though, was that continuing storyline.
Yeah.
That was something that was pretty new. And so I think a lot of times the Monster of the Week episodes were just to give them time to write more story, like, okay, well, fine, we'll put this out here. And then sometimes, unlike...
This kind of sounds like our podcast.
Unlike some other shows, like I always keep going back to Buffy because they would have like whole season arcs, over everything, and even a lot of the first season aside, their Monster of the Week episodes, they would drop stuff in there that that fed into the overarching story. X-Files didn't really do that a whole lot. Like usually in your standalone episodes, they would do a little bit more character building than they would everything else, One of the things they really got bad about doing was Scully being abducted.
Yeah.
Because it was either Scully being abducted or Scully cancer coming back. Those two things.
Or being pregnant.
Well, see, Gillian Anderson got pregnant at the end of the first season.
I know.
And so that's why she was off the show for a little bit in the beginning of the second season because she was having her baby. And then they brought her back. And that was like she had been abducted at the end of season 1.
Yeah.
And then they did this whole thing where she had cancer. And it seemed like whenever they would kind of write themselves into a corner, that's what they would go back to, of like, oh, her cancer's back again, you know, and it was kind of a, what's going, you know, it really...
And what caused the cancer.
Yeah, exactly, you know, and everything. And
why is it not acting the way it normally should
be? Exactly.
Is this an alien life form?
And then, you know, I think she got abducted again. I know Mulder got abducted at least a couple of times. Yeah. And it was just kind of one of those, like, oh, come on, guys. Like, seriously, you're spinning your wheels here. You know, this is not as bad as some other television shows.
I honestly believe that the writers of Lost watched X-Files for all the worst episodes and worst storylines, and took them all and put them all in the same.
Lost was only 2 years after the X-Files was off the air. You know that
it made all the same mistakes, even worse.
I disagree, but that's a whole
garbage
other
show.
That is a whole other thing we could get into.
Smoke monster. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, smoke, and they explained the smoke monster wonderfully by the time it was over. So it was
junk show.
How much of that show have you actually watched?
The first 2 seasons, because my wife made me.
Oh, let's see. That's no. I can't believe you watched the first 2 seasons and feel that way, because those first 2 seasons are great. So,
because after every episode, I was like, "This makes no sense whatsoever."
I can sum it up in 2 words:
junk.
Magic Island. That's that's the whole, like, okay, fine. Once you accept that they're on a magic island, okay, now it's about all the other stuff. Forget about that. It's about the people. It's about their interactions. It's about the fact that won't they get off the, you know.
The fact that I have to accept Magic Island into my life to understand the rest of the storyline is a ridiculous premise in and of itself. Well, why did this happen? Magic Island. What are you smoking? Well, there is a smoke monster. No, what are you smoking?
Yeah. So, so I take it whenever I do my Lost retrospective, you're not going to want to come on the show.
No. I might watch it just so I can sit here and bag on it, man, the entire time you're professing your love for this piece of trash.
I started a few years ago rewatching it, and I only got through like the first season or something because other stuff came up and I just kind of fell off with it. And I was like, man, I forgot how I was rewatching, like, man, because I have not rewatched Lost since it went off the air, which it's been off the air for 13 years now.
And it's not enough time.
And I'm just like, man, it was another one of those phenomenons that just exploded. And, you know, I mean, it was huge.
And put garbage everywhere.
And, you know, but it's funny how so many of those shows like that.
Was that another J.J. Abrams?
It was. That was a J.J. Abrams.
Yeah, and there was that. That's the beginning of the end of Star Wars, right there.
And there was, you think about shows like the first season of Heroes was huge. I mean, like, you know, it was drawing in huge numbers.
That show started off pretty good,
and then it imploded on itself. Yeah, you know, and it was just like, what just happened?
Was that another J.J. Abrams?
No.
Who was that?
I don't remember.
It started out pretty good.
It did. That
then
first
it took a
season,
break, and it was like,
that first season was great. Then, you know, they came back for the second season, and that's when the writer's strike happened. But I'll be honest, by the time it came back to the end of like the second season, it was one of those things where it's like, something's just off here.
It's
like,
not
this
right.
is not the same show, you know. And then I think it was only like 13 episodes or something, and then that's all they had filmed prior to the strike. And then they said, well, we're not going to come back. We'll just come back for season 3. And then nobody came back for season 3.
Yeah.
And it just kind of limped along. I think it might have actually made it to a 4th season, but nobody was watching it by that point.
I wasn't.
And then they tried that revival of it, remember, a few years ago?
Yeah, with Zachary Levi.
Yeah, I watched an episode and I was like, oh yeah, I remember why I hated this show.
Yeah.
And apparently everybody else did as well. So
honestly, he shouldn't have done that show. He should have brought Chuck back.
Well, he's been trying. He's still trying. We still need to do our Chuck episode.
We will get to it. I know we've been talking about it for months. Because
I completely rewatched that earlier this year for us to do this.
I'm going to have to completely rewatch it over again, and I've got to pull sound clips to do the production on it. So
I think, you know, we could just do an episode without having to do all the sound clips and everything.
No. If I'm doing a Chuck episode...
So everybody knows this. The reason we have not done the Chuck episode is because Dave wants to do all this other like fancy stuff to go along with it.
Yes,
so we're pretty much waiting on him on this one. So
it's my fault.
I've been ready to go for months on this one.
I'll take the blame for it. It's my fault. I want it to be right.
But yeah, and it's funny, all these shows that we talked about, Chuck, maybe not so much, but all these other shows that we've talked about owe a debt to the X-Files.
Yeah.
I mean, straight up. I mean, it's like if the X-Files had not been as popular as it was, we would not have gotten all this other stuff.
We wouldn't have got all the weird ghost stories and outer space stories.
Exactly.
And what's funny is that X-Files was really an homage back to the old, Twilight Zone,
it was
Outer Limits.
It was
the UFO shows, and
it was Kolchak, the Night Stalker.
Yeah,
that was the show that Chris Carter's talked about. That and I remember watching that show as a kid. I loved it, and because it was such a weird show, and which is funny because we're going to actually talk. We watched a few episodes for this, and one of them, Gavin. What's his name? Gavin. Gavin. Shit. The dad from he was Kolchak was in this.
The guy from Christmas.
The Christmas Story, yeah.
What's funny is a buddy
Darren
of mine,
McGavin.
A friend of mine just visited the Christmas Story house over the weekend with his wife. They made him wear the bunny suit the whole tour.
Darren McGavin.
Yes, Darren McGavin. Which that character shows up in 2 or 3 different episodes.
I think probably, but we watched for this show, because again, we can't do the full overarching everything, but we watched the pilot.
Yep.
And then we watched Unusual Suspects from season 5,
which is where the Lone Gunmen,
the origin of the Lone Gunmen,
yeah.
And then we watched one called Travelers.
Yes,
Travelers.
It's a throwback to the original X-Files.
It's
and
the origin
how it got started.
The origin of the X-Files, basically.
Yeah.
What's funny is that all 3 of these episodes that we watched all take place earlier than when they were actually appearing on television. I don't know if you noticed that or not. The pilot takes place in the spring of 92. It didn't come on until like fall of 93. Yeah. But that was set then. And then the Unusual Suspects was in 89. Is that what 80? 88, 89, something around in
like
there.
That.
And then the Travelers episode took place in 1990.
Yeah.
So it was kind of one of those where it's like, okay, it's cool that all these episodes are like...
Well, you kept getting glimpses of John's partner in the FCC booth on the computer in the back of it.
Right.
And all he's doing all day long is playing Dig Dug.
I know. Let's start with the pilot.
That's a perfectly logical place to begin.
We'll start with the pilot. The pilot episode is one of the better pilot episodes I've seen of a television show.
It kind of jumps right in.
It absolutely does, and it also tells you everything that you need to know about this. It starts off. You see this. It's
like a teletype. It's black screen with teletype.
Yeah,
and it comes up.
And it says based on.
Yeah.
I said, was it based on actual events or something?
Actual events that have happened.
Yeah, and it's like, and it goes, and which is funny because that pilot does not have the intro at all. We don't get the music. We don't get any of that stuff. Which we need to talk when we get a chance. We need to talk about Mark Snow's music in this, as well as some other stuff that I noticed. It starts with this girl being abducted. She's running through the forest.
And something's chasing her.
Yeah, and then she falls down. She sees a light, and then somebody appears, and there's a whirlwind of light and leaves, and then there's a bright light, and then she's gone.
Yep.
And then they find her the next day, I guess, or whatever it is, a sheriff, everything.
She's dead.
And come to find out, she's from the class of '89, and this was the 4th person from that this has happened to, and
from that graduating
class. So it's kind of one of those, it sets it up. And then we're in the FBI, and we're introduced to Scully.
In D.C.
And she's being brought in to be placed on the X-Files. She's asked about Fox Mulder. And
she's asked about Fox Mulder and what she knows about him, and she states that he's a brilliant profiler, made his bones on some big case.
Right.
But his tendencies had ended up gaining him a nickname,
Spooky Mulder.
Yeah, while in training.
Right. And so they want her to go in and
basically discredit him.
Basically is what they want, because she's a forensic scientist, and it's a doctor, yeah, and she's and so it's one of those things where it sets up immediately. And of course, Mulder, when they first meet, he's like, "Oh, so you're the one that was sent in here to spy on me."
Yeah.
Like he immediately, he's like, "Yeah, I know exactly what's going on here," And through the course of, with everything that we find out here, there's a lot of world building in this first episode.
There is.
He talks about his sister being abducted when he was 12 years old.
Yep.
Which is a big thing in this. His sister, that's the whole linchpin of why he's doing what he's doing.
It's the whole catalyst.
Exactly, because she was abducted from the house that he was in.
And he watched it happen and couldn't stop it.
Couldn't do anything. And so he's trying to find out what's going on. And that's a whole thing that happens over the course of this series.
Yeah.
And
did it happen because of his father?
Yeah.
What he was involved
exactly.
with.
And there is. That's that you find out later that there may very well have been it wasn't aliens. It was the government that abducted her. And, and it was because they were trying to keep his dad in line.
Yeah.
Which we find out later that his dad, was kind of doing the same thing when he was in the FBI. He wasn't doing the X-Files per se, but he was...
He was the one that was kind of putting the kibosh on the
He
X-Files.
was kind of the... Originally, the guy's name was Deep Throat, that he would talk to, that would give him information, and then he was killed, and they brought on another guy, and it was... what's the guy's name? William... he was in the Unusual episode. He was the one that he was on 21 Jump Street. He was their sergeant. I'm talking about William. I can't remember his name.
Pick up your phone and look it up.
I am. I should have had all this already down here, but it's.
It's not like we don't have the entire world's knowledge at our fingertips. Curated and censored by Google.
Yeah, pretty much. Stephen Williams.
There you go.
And he what's his character's name on the X-Files? He was just called Mr. X, but he was another guy that worked inside the bureau that would give him information.
Yeah.
And that was the whole thing. It was like, it didn't happen in any of the episodes we watched, but whenever he needed help, he would literally tape an X to the window.
Yeah.
And then, information, either he would be contacted to meet somewhere or something would show up, and like I said, the first guy's name was he called him Deep Throat.
Yeah.
And then he was killed, and then Mr. X became through the rest of it. This first episode, they go through a couple of they fly to Oregon, is where this happened, and immediately strange things start happening, where they're driving and all of a sudden...
Well, the first thing they do is he's already called ahead to have a body exhumed.
But they're driving there and they lose power in the car.
Yep.
And
lose time.
They didn't lose time that time. It was just power. The first time. And
you're right,
because he gets out and he puts a big X on the asphalt on the.
Well, no, they didn't even lose power. He just noticed that all the gauges were
everything
was
going crazy, and so he
just got out,
he stopped, and he put the big X in there.
Yeah,
and so later in the episode they go back.
That's when they lose
power, and they lose 9 minutes.
Yeah. Which is classic.
And he gets out and walks, and they're right there close to that exact same.
Yeah.
It's funny because Scully is almost ready to believe several times in this pilot episode. There are several things where she's like, "Wait a second," especially with everything that happens whenever they exhume the body and they find out that it's not really the guy that died. Or they think that it's not, but they find this implant in his nasal cavity.
Yeah.
And, she's frightened at the report and everything. They get called because there was one of the other people that they're investigating is killed. And while they're gone...
Somebody burns the
they're told that
the body was
taken from the morgue out with everything, and they go back, and both the hotel rooms are on fire. The only thing that survived was the implant.
Which turns out to be the twist at the end of the episode.
Right.
Where she basically debunks Mulder.
Exactly.
And then she goes, but I kept this on my person the entire time.
Right.
We found, and she puts it on his desk.
I know. And when she pulls out that implant, she puts it down and she goes, I had it tested. There's no, it doesn't match any alloy that I've ever, that we know. And
on the face of the planet.
Exactly. And then at the end of it, you see the cigarette man.
Smoking man.
Originally, he was called Cancer Man for the first season or something, and then they changed it to the Cigarette Smoking Man.
But the fans know him as a smoker.
I know, yeah, and so, he's like this. He's there when she goes in to talk to them initially.
Yep.
Then he's there when they're doing the interrogation.
Yep.
On the Billy, after he comes out of his coma and they find him, in the woods and everything. And then at the end, when Scully's leaving the meeting, she passes him in the hallway.
Yep.
And he walks in and whatever. And then the very last thing we see is him going into an evidence room and putting
in the Pentagon.
And putting the implant in with some other implants.
Yep.
And that's the end of the episode, but it's all there. I mean, it's like, he starts, there are several points, like there's that one point, and it always stuck with me for 30 years of, on all of the victims, they found these 2 like puncture wounds on the back of like their lower back. Okay. And so when they had their missing time thing or whatever, so they're back at their hotels and she's going to go take a shower and she notices that she's got something on her lower back, and she goes to Mulder's room and she's like, I need you to look at this to make sure, where she's starting to wonder if all of this, and he's like, no, it's mosquito bites. He's like, I've got them too, and you can see the relief on her face of just like, oh my goodness. And that's when they really have their moment of like kind of becoming friends, where he's like, he tells her about his sister and, and about all this other stuff, and it's just kind of the way that they set these characters up and got them moving in the same direction in one episode, you don't see in a whole lot of pilots for things. Usually they're kind of clunky, and it takes a little bit of time for them to build chemistry.
Was there.
It was there, yeah. I couldn't remember if it was in this episode, and it wasn't. But I think it's either in the second or the third episode where Fox Mulder comes walking into the X-Files to his office, and Scully's sitting there watching a videotape that they had been given or whatever, like she's sitting at his desk watching the video, and he was like, what did you do with the other videotape that was in there? And she goes, don't worry, I'll put it with the other videotapes that aren't yours over in the cabinet. There is this ongoing thing in the X-Files that Mulder is like addicted to porn. Like it just keeps like coming, it's like one of those, but that was like the first like, oh, okay, this is there are so many things that we could get into if we really want to do a deep dive. But the second episode that we watched was called The Unusual Suspects. Season 5.
The Lone Gunmen.
This is the origin of the Lone Gunmen, which the Lone Gunmen, we had seen they would pop in 3 or 4 times in a season, and it's usually when Fox needed, or when I keep calling it Fox, when Mulder needed, help with something, he would go to these guys,
because they turned out to be the biggest conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, and of course they were early internet, and all that kind of stuff. And
you've got one that was the communications liaison for the FCC.
For the FCC, right?
Narc,
right? That's they kept calling him all those narc.
Which was, and he was named after JFK, which was a nice touch. Mm-hmm. And then you had, I can never remember the other two's names. But both of them are hackers, and both of them are electronic geniuses, and both of them have built the exact same device to get people.
It's free cable.
Basically,
yeah. And of course they're always arguing about who has done it better. It was Melvin and it was Melvin Frohickey. That's the older of them. It was and then Richard Ringo Langley was the other one.
The hippie.
He reminds me of somebody. I kept trying to figure out who, like another character, that or it was probably kind of based off of him more probably. But yeah, they're always arguing back and forth about who's better, this and that, whose kung fu is stronger is what they keep saying, and but the whole thing happens there at it's basically like a consumer electronics convention, and John sees this woman and he starts talking to her, and she's telling him that her daughter had been kidnapped. She's trying to find her ex because he kidnapped the daughter and all this kind of stuff, and she convinces him to hack the government.
She convinces a government employee to hack the government who works for a division that's supposed to stop people from
doing
hacking.
this. I know. And
I was like, oh, he's totally potted.
I know.
This is a full honey pot right here.
But, well, even with the fact that she said that her name was Holly, not Honey. I'm sorry. Yeah. And it was funny because they're sitting there and he's like, oh, like the sugar. Obviously, she took it from because the sugar was called Holly something. But she, and when he gets the information and they're printing it out, and she sees her ex, who is Fox Mulder. Yeah.
There he is. He took the child. Get him.
Yeah. And so the whole thing kind of devolves from there. And come to find out, oh wait, he works for the FBI. What's going on? And then we find out that
the government is going to be testing chemicals on its population through asthma inhalers.
Yes.
This doesn't sound
familiar at all. Slightest.
The federal government testing chemicals on its own populace.
I know. I can't imagine that ever happening.
Illegally.
Can't imagine that ever happening.
No.
Tuskegee. St. Louis.
Oh, I forgot about St. Louis.
St.
You're right. Yeah. St. Louis.
I mean, we could go through a lot of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
But so through the course of it all, it's one of those things that these I'm trying to remember. Sorry, it's been a long day.
Did you block out?
I did. My mind just went completely blank there.
We're talking about the Lone Gunmen.
I know. So it goes through. Come to find out, we find out all this stuff about them trying to do everything. But the way it's all framed is that it's being told in flashback. John's being interrogated by Detective Munch.
Yep.
The
Munch verse.
This is where the Munch verse. Oh, here's the other thing. Did you notice who wrote this episode?
I didn't.
Vince Gilligan.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Of Breaking Bad fame.
Yes. I knew Vince Gilligan had written several episodes of this. I did not realize this was one of them.
Okay.
It's funny you go in and look at some of that stuff, like Vince Gilligan. Of course, I noticed that Kim Manners directed the first episode, which Kim Manners directed a ton of episodes of The X-Files. That's kind of where he got his start with directing. I know Tim Minear directed a bunch of episodes, and he went on to do a whole bunch of, you could go back through and see like guest stars like Jack Black with an early role on The X-Files.
I've forgotten about that.
What's his name? Ryan Reynolds had an early role on here. Who else? Giovanni Ribisi was on an episode. I mean, it's just like you just kind of go back and you can see all these people before they were anybody, came through the show. But the fact that we actually picked one that Vince Gilligan wrote was kind of nice. Interesting. And so it goes through, and then at the end of it, they go to the warehouse. All of a sudden, government agents show up, and then more government agents show up, and then more government agents show up, and they're all fighting each other. And it's like, what is going on here? And that's where we see Mr. X, Yeah. And that was kind of the whole, they don't do anything to these guys. They kind of scare them into you didn't see anything or whatever. And then John says something to him about, what about all the conspiracies? What about JFK? He looks at him and goes, I heard it was a lone gunman, and that was so that's where they kind of got they
took their name.
And then Fox Mulder comes and finds them later because he gets dosed. After he calms down, he says they didn't have anything to do with it. He talks to him later and is basically like...
He's like, well, what do you want to know?
I know.
I want the truth. He's like, well, sit down. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and so it's basically where you see the beginning of 3 conspiracy theorists all of a sudden.
4.
Well, yeah. But
I mean, you get...
Fox was already... or Mulder was already there. So,
you get 4 sitting down
I know,
and comparing notes.
But he's really indoctrinating them at this point, where
because he's like, okay, you've got that right, but this is where you need to be looking. Yeah. And he kind of draws them in.
And then the final episode that we watched is from, I think it was also from season 5, wasn't it?
Yes.
It's called Travelers, and it's the origin of the X-Files. And it goes back to the 1950s of the McCarthy era, the Red Scare and everything.
Which turned out to not be a Red Scare at all.
According to the X-Files.
According to the X-Files.
I always loved the way the X-Files would do that.
Yeah.
Where they would say, oh, it was this thing. It's like, no, it really wasn't this. It was this other thing that was happening. It was like, this is the cover story.
You mean the government pointing at something that's completely not true to cover up something that's really going on?
Yeah, I know. Imagine that.
That doesn't happen at all.
It's not like wars have been started over that, huh?
Hey, UFOs are real.
Don't even. Okay, we're not even. We would be here all day if we want to get into all that. So, but yeah, so it's what was his character's name? Anyways, Mulder goes and finds this guy because
he's hunting down something on his dad.
Yeah, but also the fact that a guy. So because if I don't start using the names, it's going to
get confusing.
It's going to get real confusing. And rather than just calling them by the, here we go. So Mulder goes and he's talking to Arthur Dales is the guy's name.
Yes.
And because this guy, his name's Edward Skur, like the FBI kills, or they find him dead, is what it was.
No,
that's right.
The sheriff and the property owner go to evict him.
They kill him. That's right.
And the sheriff ended up shooting him because he attacks him.
That's right. And so Edward Skur was a guy that they had been hunting back in the 1950s.
Edward Skur, by the way, was Garrett Dillahunt.
Mm-hmm. Well, Frederick Laney played the young Arthur Dales, and he's been in a ton. He's like one of those it's that guy, So the last thing that Skur says is Mulder before he dies.
Yeah.
And so, Fox Mulder is going and asking Dales about like what's going on here. And so he starts telling the story about finding this guy and him being taken before the
McCarthy trials,
whatever they called it, and all this kind of stuff, and then like how he had died.
Yeah,
he had died, in custody, he had killed himself, but then he sees him again and gets attacked by him, and it's just this whole, trying to figure out what's going on. And the whole time Dales is like trying to find out what's going on, and everybody around him just keeps saying, let it go, let it go, let it go.
Yeah.
But Skur is still killing people. And he's got some kind of weird, like it's like a bug or something that's inside of him that keeps coming out. Something.
Transplant. It looked like some kind of spider.
Yeah. And so what we find out about the X-Files is that Dale's, one of the secretaries in the office, she said he was asking about a case, and she's like, oh, that's in the X-File. You're like, what do you mean it's in the X-Files?
Well, his name is in one of the X-Files.
Right. And he's like, what are you talking about, X-Files? She's like, well, it's all the unsolved cases. He's like, why is it under you? He's like, we ran out of room and there's nothing in X. So I just started. So that's how we know where the X-Files came from, and so Dales, goes and investigates, and it's one of those things where at the end of it, they do catch Skur.
Well, again. In the middle of it, Mulder's
dad
right. sends him a message, hey, meet me.
Right.
And Mulder's dad points him in a certain direction.
Right.
He actually shows him how to find the guy, and it was all a trap.
Right. And then at the end of the episode, when they've captured Skur and they're driving, and Mulder releases Skur. Yeah. Like basically says, go, and so that's kind of, he owed Mulder a debt of gratitude, basically, is what it, for letting him, not letting him go to the government facility, to be tested and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's the 3 episodes we chose these because they were all like origin stories in some way, of characters, what happened to the Lone Gunmen, don't you?
I don't remember. I did.
They died heroic deaths.
Oh, did they? Was it on the spinoff?
No, it was in the X, because by the time the spinoff was over a year before the show was. They were back, and it was late in season 2.
When Jump the Shark 9. Was it?
No, I don't remember when it was. It was late in season 9, and there was I'm trying to remember the exact. Basically, what it came down to is that they were trapped in a facility where there was a toxic. There was a toxic gas that was going to get out.
Okay.
And they wound up sealing themselves in to make sure that it didn't happen, and they died that way. They basically saved a bunch of people, by sealing themselves in with the gas to make sure that it wasn't released.
Gotcha.
Which they wound up making appearances in the final episode, and then again in the
You sure it was season 9?
I think it was season 9. It was somewhere near the end of season 9.
Okay, it's got to be Jump the Shark then. Because Reyes and Doggett turned to the Lone Gunmen for help.
It may be. Yeah. It must stop a destructive virus from entering the populace. Yeah, that's it. So, yeah.
So, season 9, episode 15.
Yeah. And, but yeah, they died heroes' deaths to make sure that the virus didn't get out of the populace. And then they wound up in the last episode of the series of season 9, the initial run, as Mulder sees them in a vision or something, and then they wound up when they did the reboot.
Yeah.
Mulder was tripping on something, and there's this where he's a scene and he's sitting there at the table with them or something. It was kind of one of those, like they brought him back a couple of times in that type of stuff. Oh, and there was actually an episode of I think it was that same episode where he found I forget exactly, but what's his name? The blonde, the guy with long hair. We talked Ringo.
Yeah.
Had. I think he had downloaded his consciousness into a computer or something like that.
Really?
Yeah, it was something or something similar. Like it was a whole deal where it was like, really, like how did this? And it wasn't complete. It wasn't perfect AI, whatever. But yeah, that whole episode had to do with that, and I don't know. It was one of those shows that, again, it's had a long tail. Even all these 30 years later. It's been off the air for 21 years now. But it's still a show that especially people of our generation really latched onto,
Oh, yeah.
And it's the whole, and also it's a very... X-Files, in a lot of ways, no pun intended, is a very Gen X show because it's that whole, like, okay, what are you not telling me?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to take this at face value. Like, no, there's something else going on underneath whatever it is that you're trying to sell, And
it's like, oh, that's a nice story. What's the truth?
Exactly. It's like, that's the question everything. It's kind of the way we've always been, Yeah, somebody says something like, okay, what's the real story? Like, no, seriously, what's the real story? And I don't believe you. What's the real story? You got to do this. Why? Why do I have to do that?
Yep. Yep.
And so the X-Files was kind of perfect for that. I miss it. It's been even before I knew this anniversary was coming up, and I knew that there was no way they were going to be able to rewatch everything.
No.
But I just recently did a binge of Gotham. Which I had never watched, but you know what? I liked it until the end.
I still haven't seen it all the way through. Because it's one of those things where I pick it up, I enjoy it for a little bit, and then they do something, I'm like, I am not watching
I literally liked that show all the way through until the final episode, and I did not like the way that they did the final episode. I mean, just did not. I was like, no. For one thing, they did Selena wrong. Like the actress that played her, they did her completely wrong because basically the last episode of Gotham jumps ahead 10 years, and they recast her.
Of course they did.
And I was just like, this is ridiculous. She's been in this show for 5 seasons, and then they recast her in the final episode.
Well, I mean, they did that to Ivy about halfway through.
They did it to her twice.
Yeah.
That was the whole, they aged her up, and then they made her a psycho the second time. It was just like, now I appreciate the fact that rather than just, we have somebody new playing her with no explanation, that they did like, oh no, she's not the same Ivy that we saw she's not the same Ivy Pepper that we saw the first time, but and the fact that like every time it came up, especially with that first time where she was like, I don't know why it happened, it just did. That was the so, and the fact that nobody recognized her at first too was also. And I'll be honest, of the 3, I liked the second one the best.
Yeah,
I thought that, and I really kind of hated to see her leave. I didn't really care for the final version of her that we got, but But yeah, I was with that show. I mean, I didn't have any problems with it all the way up until the very last episode. And I was like, oh man, what are they doing? Why did they do this? You know, it just, and, but you know, it is what it is. I would say all that to say that I have been contemplating rewatching the X-Files.
Again?
You know, I haven't rewatched it. Like, I'll admit there are episodes. You having problems over there?
I just want a little bit more.
There are episodes between season 6 and 9 that I've never seen. You know, that just,
yeah.
You know, because that's where I had kind of jumped off with it, and I kind of would like to go back and fill in what happened during all that time, because especially like after Mulder left, I didn't watch. I literally did not watch any of the post Mulder stuff. And
because he was kind of the main character that everybody cared about
until I did watch the final episode, because I wanted to see how they were going to end it, and then I was like, really talking about a bad ending to a show. The X-Files is one of the worst. I mean, just oh man, and I don't know it. If I had more time, that's really what it comes down to. If I had more time, because there's several shows I'm kind of been like, I want to go back and rewatch that again. You know,
see, the X-Files, like I said, I only caught it in syndication. Mm-hmm. It was an episode here and there,
right?
And it's mainly the Monster of the Week episodes I remember, and we already covered pretty much the ones I remember the most. You know, like Humbug,
right? And Home was probably the most famous episode they ever did.
Yeah, the Lone Gunmen episodes are always fun,
right? And of course the Jose Chung's from Outer Space. That's another big. Bad Blood's another one that's really people will remember.
The ones that were like
Luke Wilson was in that episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like it wasn't one of it was like when before he was big, but he's in that episode.
It's the ones that were like shocking, like. Whoa. Mm-hmm. Whoa.
Yeah. Home, especially.
Oh, yeah.
That was, and that was talking about, I had gotten to the point to where, like, if I was not going to be at home on a Friday or a Sunday,
VCR,
I recorded it every week. I had my VCR set to record every week. And I did. I had one videotape that I recorded over so many times it wasn't even funny. I mean, it was like by the time that I kind of jumped off of it, it was really thin. It was like really bad quality stuff because it had been recorded over so many times.
Stretched that tape out.
Yeah, but that was the way we did it back then,
Oh, yeah.
And, and it's still on in syndication. I still find it, places here and there. And I forget what cable channel it comes on now. Because it wasn't all that long ago I was flipping through the channels. I was like, oh, look, X-Files is on. And it wasn't like Sci-Fi. It was some other like
it was like one of the little minor channels.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, over there,
begging for stuff to play.
But you can't go wrong with. I mean, you can't go wrong with the X-Files. I'm trying to. There was an album. You remember that Songs in the Key of X? Oh,
I had forgotten about that.
Yeah, and it was like, they had a bunch of different bands do songs.
Yeah,
that were inspired by and it was like. Yeah, Danzig was on it, and Foo Fighters. Elvis Costello had a track on there.
Really?
Yeah, it was like real like cool bands.
Hold on.
They also, like I said, they had a series of books that were put out. Like,
there was a comic book series.
Yeah, there was, but there was a series of books also that were like they were kind of like episodes. Like I know there was one of them that was called Whirlwind. I remember there was Whirlwind, and then there was another one that was, I forget what it was called. I read like the first two of them that came out. They were really good. They were novels, and the comic book was Topps Comics put that out, and I followed that for a while.
Okay, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Yeah.
Mark Snow with the original theme, Soul Coughing, Sheryl Crow, Gary Newman, and Tubeway Army. REM, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Filter, Frank Black, Screamin' Jay Hawkins, Rob Zombie, Alice Cooper. That's all there.
That's Songs in the Key of X.
Yeah, that's what I've got.
I thought there was more to that one. Are you looking at it up on Spotify, or are you looking up on...
Well, that was a Wikipedia. It's got the same thing on Spotify, though. See if you can find a different playlist.
I'm not seeing anything over here. I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering it different. I could have swore that Danzig was on there. Elvis Costello.
Okay. I must have had an incomplete list.
Okay, yeah.
Because there was evidently Black Francis.
Yeah.
PM Dawn remix of the X-Files theme.
Yeah.
Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Alice Cooper, PM Dawn, Mark Snow, REM, William S. Burroughs, Soul Coughing, Foo Fighters, Down in the Park, Danzig, Nick Cave with the Dirty Three, Meat Puppets, Filter. Foo Fighters is not on here.
Yeah, you said Foo Fighters.
Did I? Oh, you're right.
Elvis Costello had a song on there too.
Yeah, with Brian Eno.
Yeah.
My Dark Life.
Yeah.
And Sheryl Crow.
Yeah. And and again, it was like not stuff that it wasn't like a soundtrack. It was just inspired by, stuff. And then of course, on the Fight the Future soundtrack, it had a bunch of, like I remember Filter did the song, was it One Is the Loneliest Number? The old Three Dog Night song.
Yeah. Filter
did a cover of that, and Mark Snow. Let's talk about Mark Snow's music. His theme for the X-Files is just iconic. I mean, you hear that immediately, like what it is. But the music that's in the episodes themselves, always set the mood perfectly. I mean, it was like even something that happens that's whimsical, he knew how to still have it feel a little bit creepy. It's like, oh whoa, what's going on here?
It's kind of like circus music, on a minor key.
Exactly. It's just like, okay,
and on a dying calliope.
Yeah, and he did. Of course, he also did the music for.
Actually, the name of a pretty decent name for a band, Dying Calliope.
There you go. He also
nobody use that. That's mine. That's mine.
Copyright Dave.
Copyright Dave.
He also did the music for Millennium.
Yes,
and again, music was great on that as well. I know that X-Files is available on Hulu, and
that's where I've been watching.
Trying to think what else. I don't know if Millennium's available anywhere.
It is not.
It isn't.
Because I went looking for it the other day.
I've got the box set of it. It's got all three seasons on it. But the X-Files, I would encourage you to go watch it. It's well worth it. And
the first 5 seasons anyway.
The first 5 seasons. Results vary after that, and those first 5 seasons though were just.
And the final 2 seasons are. Okay.
The reboot, or the not the reboot, but the revival that they did.
They're going to leave you very unsatisfied.
I enjoyed.
Yeah.
I enjoyed them till I didn't. It's basically what it came down to. I think that season 10 is worth watching. Season 11 gets it wanders a little too much. I think that was the problem with me, where I was like, I'm just not invested in this any longer, But those first 5 seasons of the X-Files, man, you cannot go wrong. You can't. Yeah, and highly miss. I can't believe it's been 30 years. That blows my mind. And but. It's such as we get older, time just kind of.
All right.
I can't believe we're in September.
Oh, I know.
For goodness sake. I mean, it seemed like Christmas was just yesterday, and here we are. We're less than 4 months away from it. Now, the good thing is that Halloween is just right around the corner, so we're going to have some really cool stuff coming up for Oktoberfest.
I don't think I have the energy.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. So
we'll wrap this up.
We're going to. I know. I'm
out of coffee. I need coffee. Wrap it up.
What was that meme that I sent? It said. Coffee doesn't ask silly questions; it just understands, or something like that.
Yes, and right now I'm out of understanding. This has been the X-Files.
This has been the X-Files. Go check out the X-Files. Go check out all of our other stuff. I know last week I said something about doing some episodes about albums that I love or whatever. I'm working on those. I'm going to get several of them in the bag before I actually start releasing them.
Okay.
So those are coming. They will be here soon.
So you're doing some solo stuff.
Yeah, and I told you can do some if you want to as well.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to find the time to do
everything.
Has been,
that's kind of been my thing. I've had time, and then I've kind of
and not having
felt that great on top of it all, and I had a bunch of work and everything else. It's just kind
and
of
that means I've got to try to actually set my studio back up again.
Yeah, well, you should have had your studio set up a long time ago. So
I haven't had any really need for it.
Yeah, well, now you do. So
fine, be that way.
So
and I may have started a new Instagram.
There you go.
Just for my motorcycle stuff.
There you go. So yeah, go check out all of our social media in the. I'll get it out here. So I obviously need more coffee as well.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's in the notes. Go check that out, and then we will be back next week with something else kind of cool. And so for the Project Genx podcast, I am Alan Smith.
I'm the other guy in dire need of coffee. I'm Big Dave.
And remember, the truth is out there.
Is it really? Because the government told us it's real.
I'm just talking about in general.
Pass the tinfoil, would you?
All right.
See ya.